Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening again. We're having a couple technical challenges. Some of you might have experienced this already, which we're sorry about, but we sent another email. So some people I expect will be coming in a little later as they receive that email, but we'll just get started and go from there. So yeah, everybody, thank you again for being in this space. This is the second episode or seminar of our industrial ecology seminar series. Today, I'm privileged to welcome Keith Jones, who I'll be introducing momentarily. My name is Pierce. For those of you that don't know me, I'm an alumni of the Industrial Ecology program, and I've continued my studies here at UVic, studying regenerative system design. I'm also an uninvited settler on the lands that I now call home, the lands that I work on. And these are the traditional territories of the Lekwungen peoples, now today the Esquimalt and Songhees First Nations. I'm also on land that the Huasanic people have historical relationships that continue to this day. I think being an uninvited settler requires a authentic engagement with that fact. And so I think my responsibility here is in part to host a space where a plurality of knowledge bases and perspectives can be present in this forum. And I appreciate your guidance and patience as we co-create that together. So with that, I'd like to formally introduce Keith Jones, who has been very generous with his time as well. We have about an hour together. Keith is much like the complex systems that Keith works within. Keith is very multifaceted. I often find in conversation with him that he's serving the mycorrhizal networks between human systems. Keith works on multi-stakeholder coordination. He received his Master's of Science from the University of British Columbia. He is a licensed professional biologist, and he is a certified management consultant. He is a deep knowledge holder of theory of change methodologies, and especially the challenge dialogue system, which Keith has been practicing for quite some time now. His work has taken him to work with different groups who have a broad set of interests, from Indigenous First Nations to academia to industry to government. And he's worked on a broad problem set, from affordable housing to food security to conservation, et cetera, et cetera. In short, Keith has a knack of shifting systems from competitive dynamics towards symbiosis. And so with that, Keith, we thank you for being here today. I'll make a quick note on logistics. So Keith, it looks like we have about 18 today, people, some students at different stages of their academic career. We have some faculty, we have members from the outside community, some alumni. Everybody, thank you for being here as well. You're welcome to show up however feels right to you, if that's becoming part of this mosaic of faces that we see slowly emerge, or whether that's being more in a solitary space. You're welcome, however, to show up however you'd like. We have about a 40-minute presentation that Keith will facilitate with a couple pauses in between. During that time, I suggest that if you have a question, just raise your hand and then I'll call on you and we'll just keep the time moving like this. And then at the end, we'll have about a 15 to 20-minute informal discussion, which I'll moderate accordingly. I think that covers everything. And so yes, with this, Keith Jones, thank you for being here with us.
My pleasure. Nice to be here. I was thinking this morning, what was the last time I actually did a presentation in a class at UVic, and I think it's probably close to 30 years ago. I used to do a regular venture up to the Cunningham building as a biologist to talk about the kind of work I was doing with the BC Forest Service. So it's nice to be back, even though it's virtual. So I'm going to share my screen right here, of course. Maybe you could just confirm you can see it okay?
Yes, we can see it.
Great, well. Thanks. And it's nice to see my brother, Brian Jones, on here. Hey, Brian. And Jade, thank you to you as well for connecting me with Pierce. We've had some super conversations, as you've probably heard, since doing so. So I'm looking forward to that. And Christian, looking forward to more chats with you sometime in the future here. So I'm hoping what we present today is going to be helpful. I wasn't quite sure how to title it. And, you know, as titles go, sometimes you do the presentation and wonder whether or not it's reflecting the title entirely. But I wanted to talk about industrial ecology from the viewpoint of maybe some approaches that we're using of a dialogue nature and outcome mapping just to explore whether or not you feel these may have some potential in terms of engaging stakeholders and others in terms of the industrial ecology initiatives that you may be undertaking. So that was the sort of the context for me to choose that kind of a title. So I'm just going to walk through a few things today. Just in terms of, I want to just spend a few minutes a little bit on my background. I know that sounds a bit egotistical, but it sort of helps you understand a little bit about where I'm coming from on this. And of course, at this point in my life, which has been a rather long and exciting journey and quite circuitous in many respects, it'll maybe help prompt some thoughts in terms of, for those of you that are on the early stages of your career, where these journeys can sometimes take you. So I'll be doing that. Following that, I wanted to sort of set a little bit of context and some assumptions in relation to the nature of dialogue and collaborative outcome mapping approaches, again, to sort of nest those thoughts into how they may play out in terms of industrial ecology opportunities. There's two things I really want to talk about. One is purposeful dialogue, assessing the power of purposeful conversation.
Just a quick note. Could we, everyone, just make sure you're on mute as well? Just make sure
and
that
then,
you're...
the second thing is really to look at another aspect of it, which is to look at collaborative outcome mapping as a powerful way to help us bring forward our collective intentions and actions in using that kind of a technique. And I've got a couple of videos that are very short that'll just show you some of that as well in terms of giving you some context, further context on the approach, but not able to obviously today get into the detail, and then some discussion and questions at the end. We'll have as Pierce mentioned, we'll have a pause part way just in case there's some burning questions you would like to ask in the intermediate period, but otherwise we can take them on more at the end. So the journey, I tend to think of my journey in two frames. You'll relate to this, Jade. The life of your Volkswagen vans that you've owned on the left-hand side. And there's been quite an array of those. And then my actual career journey on the right-hand side, which includes changes in location as well. So just going on the left side here, really, my background is very much started with research, science, and forest and forestry. And my early work when I was a high school student was out at the Pacific Forest Research Center. So I was lucky to get involved and get working with an incredible mentor who really kind of got me really excited about science. So not everyone is lucky like that, but that really helped point me in the right direction. So a whole summer in Prince George climbing trees with lots of pitch in them really got me excited about growth of trees and modeling and that kind of thing. So that was in the late 60s, actually, when I was doing that. I then studied at UVic in biology and botany. And in those days, there was a course called Environmental Studies. And I signed up for it. Most of us didn't really quite know what environmental studies was at that time. And I remember we spent a lot of time defining terminology and wrapping our minds around what some of those terms meant, like environmental quality. I took a gap year off and realized I was short on a lot of knowledge. I was not so bad on the above ground biomass and describing vegetation, but my understanding of soils and superficial geology had a lot to be desired. So away I went to UBC after that year and started a master's in forest ecology. And a lot of that work at that time and study was focused on ecosystem classification methodologies to support forest management decision-making in British Columbia. And that work in turn led to employment with Agriculture Canada. It was a research station just below the UBC Faculty of Forestry at that time. And I was involved in some watershed mapping out by Hope. And again, pretty green, but hoping to delineate land units that were helpful for forest planning. I also was involved in some environmental assessment work in the Fraser River Delta estuary area. And again, another mentor at that point in time came into my life and would help direct me more on the academic pathways. In 1980 or thereabouts, I moved to Ontario. I got an offer to work with Agriculture Canada, but based out of Guelph. And there I was thrown into a big black hole and said, we want you to develop a forest soils program. These people in the forestry are not overly knowledgeable in soils, and we really need to bring them that doctrine. And that work ended up, I was going to stay there for 2 years, turned into a 10-year program where we were developing collaborative approaches to the development of ecosystem classification systems, initially in the boreal forests in the far north, and then across the full boreal of Ontario, but then ultimately for the entire province. And that work led to, ultimately became enshrined in legislation called the Crown Forest Sustainability Act to support, again, a lot of as forestry was beginning to move into more than just timber management, but into more ecosystem-oriented management of forests. The next stop was the development when I was moved back west a little bit, but not quite the whole way, to Alberta and to the Alberta Research Council. And we got involved then in something we referred to as predictive ecosystem mapping. And so if in the work in Ontario was focused on trying to classify individual sites as people walked into the forest, what kind of ecosystem conditions were they dealing with, we began to realize that was fine, but we really needed to be able to delineate their extent, and that would really be helpful in terms of supporting the planning of forests. So that's when that work started, and that also got me involved in working with joint ventures with the private sector. We did some work with Hughes Aircraft at that time and developed and commercialized this technology into the private sector. In 1990, I joined ESRI Canada, the Geographic Information System company, and opened up the Victoria office. And our work then my work was mainly involved in, at that point, forest management decision support system technology development and marketing. And I had access to the ESRI international channels at that time. It was kind of like going to the annual meetings, were kind of like going to a little United Nations. But I really learned a lot in terms of how hard it is to take products into the marketplace. I think over the course of 5 years, we sold one license to a product we called Arc Forest, this decision support system. So it was a bit sobering, and they were kind enough to provide me with some bridging to become then an independent consultant. But during that time, and when I was an independent consultant, I did get involved in sustainable forest management methodologies as part of the Canadian Model Forest Program. And in particular, I was working with the Model Forest that was in Prince George. And that was getting into some really neat spatially explicit forest modeling techniques and visualization techniques as well. So come 1996, as I mentioned, I was an independent consultant and working mainly in natural resources, science, technology, and again, some commercialization, doing business cases and situation analyses, developing concept papers, and so on. Again, a lot of them looking at advancing the predictive ecosystem mapping methods that had been developed earlier. And they were starting to become much more mature at that point in time. A lot of my work as well was really getting into facilitating multi-agency initiatives, both in BC, but also in Alberta and Ontario at times. So these agencies were basically silos that talked to one another occasionally, but they didn't intersect too much by design. And so it was really my job, because I was working for both environment and forestry on various contracts. I ended up being the person that had kind of the knowledge in between the two, and was able to kind of communicate and help them start to work together on their common intentions. In 2003 and 4, I met an amazing fellow by the name of Don Simpson. I was told by a colleague that we should connect. We operated in very similar ways. Don's about 15 years older than myself, and he remains also my mentor at this point in time. He's based out of Toronto, although at the time when I met him, he was living in Victoria. And Don had developed some systems to help with all of this work around bringing groups together to address complex challenges. And he called it the Challenge Dialogue System, or CDS. So again, another methodology. And also an associated network globally of people that he had engaged with on various complex challenges in Africa, Southeast Asia, Sweden, England, the US, and so on. So it was tapping into quite a fascinating network for me. And that then led basically to moving my independent consultant work really up several floors. I say it that way because all of a sudden I was able to use the methodology much more to solve a class of problem as opposed to anything specific. So I was able to then work in healthcare, emerging infectious diseases, oceans, literacy, food, all the other areas, because really all of these had commonalities in terms of the kind of challenges that they were being faced in those different communities of practice and interest. So for me, it was like opening a huge door of opportunity that I never would have ever imagined would have come. And so a lot of that work, I must have undertaken 20 to 30 dialogues in various things. It got me involved in work in the US and also in Africa. And a lot of it was moving up also in terms of the complexity of the challenges we were dealing. A lot of this work was really what I would refer to as transformative change, not just incremental change. So I learned an amazing amount and managed to, with that, work with a lot of the colleagues that Don had introduced me to as well. With all of that, we started to ask the question both of innovation and of collaboration and of the challenge dialogue system itself. Was this learnable? Were there things we were doing, or was this just all about Don Simpson and his special magic? And so that caused us to begin to codify the approach and figure out what were the salient features of it that we felt were learnable, and led to, of course, a learning program. So I was put in charge of developing the pilot learning program, and then since we've had about 4 or 5 iterations of it. Another piece that I got involved in was contributing this collaborative outcome mapping methodology. So we're using still the dialogue approaches of the base challenge dialogue system, but this now gets into a much more tactical and visual expression of strategy, and using those methods as a way to help bring people together and see literally how change will occur. Tied to that, again, I've mentioned we had a network of practitioners and mentors as well was formed. So that's my journey so far. So lots of science, lots of being thrown into black holes with no resources or very limited resources, which forced me then to have to collaborate and find common purpose with my colleagues. And in the case of Ontario, it was pretty unique at that time to be having 4 federal agencies and 2 provincial agencies working together on a common cause to develop these forest ecosystem classifications. So collaboration just became a part of my blood. And not to mention, of course, it also is, I find, a lot more enjoyable to work with other people, and you end up learning a lot more as well. So a little bit on context. As I was thinking about this talk, it's very evident to me, and I think the discussions I've certainly had with Pierce and Jade on this, and Christian, around, we're having to grapple with the interplay of an inordinate number of environmental, social, and cultural and economic phenomena right now. And I think for some people, it's approaching the point of being overwhelming. So we really are needing to find a way in which we can make these challenges more concrete, wrap our minds around them, and begin to act on them in an effective way, and do it together. The bad news is, as I've been pointed out by my kids, time is not on our side. We have to be, I would say, there's an expression that I obtained through a group from a design group out of Rhode Island on a project. We must act with patient urgency. So we need to be patient, know when to set the pace, when we can move, but also there is such amazing urgency. So we can only sort of expend so much time trying to figure these things out. We soon need to act. So it's finding some of that sweet spot between those 2 points that's key in my mind. And just so you know, I'm a hopeless optimist. So I always look at the positive. It's so nice to be able to be interacting with people like Pierce and Jade and many other people of their cohort. There's tremendous inspiration and passion. And that's what kind of keeps me doing what I'm doing in many respects. I am super hopeful of the future. I'm not suggesting that it's not going to be a rocky ride, but the insights and innovation that's happening right now is breathtaking. So on the right-hand side here, as an ecologist, this was evident to me from the outset as I began to read all of the books and texts as I was doing my master's and even in my undergrad. But everything is connected to everything, and we're all sort of seeing this these linkages and associations in different ways, through relationships and direct connections, of course. But we're looking at ways we can kind of integrate and combine things. We're looking at ways in which we can deal with different forms of complexity, all the way from simplicity to complexity, or complicated problems, wicked problems, and in some cases, things that the phenomena are much more closer to chaos in terms of the way they behave. And we're also looking at things in terms of continua, certainly when it comes to things like collaboration. There is a what I call the C continuum, from communication, contribution, coordination, cooperation, collaboration, all the way to synergistic relationships, and symbiotic and holistic. These are all words that help us use in different ways to help us see how these things interconnect and interplay. I won't go any further on these, but these are the kinds of thinking sets that come into play when we start to do dialogues, and also when we start to do the collaborative outcome mapping. So suffices to say, though, we have many issues that are converging, overlapping. I think Pierce, you've referred to it as the meta crisis. I would be putting on my hopeless optimist hat and say it's the meta opportunity. I think we need to wrap our minds around ways in which we can start to respond to these kinds of challenges as well. And I think we are. Around 2001, this advertisement in the middle of this page, you could see it in the Time magazine, The Economist, and many others. And most of us at the time weren't even thinking much about things like climate change or all those intersections of things. It was more a matter of, in this case, the context was, unless you collaborate, you won't be able to innovate. And if you don't innovate, you won't survive as a company. But it's kind of a bit tragic at this point in time. I mean, it's rather extreme, collaborate or die. But again, we're faced with having to develop solutions to unprecedented and urgent challenges everywhere. You just don't pick up the newspaper, as you well know, without seeing or listening to the news about things we have to be getting on with it, things that are not working well, and where the responses are usually now urgent. So we live in this kind of a setting, and as I mentioned at the beginning, many of us are feeling, I think, very overwhelmed with its pace, with the magnitude of the change that's going on, the scale, frequency of things, and also the breadth of these phenomena that are coming upon us. And of course, the reality is that most of these challenges do not nicely go into little boxes. They transcend. They transcend geography, jurisdiction, domains, sectors, disciplines, and populations. And many of these things are, of course, quite agnostic to populations, whereas others, in some cases, are highly tuned to particular vulnerable populations, which are most strongly affected as well. So, but again, this is the nature of these complex challenges we're having to deal with. So we have to think differently. We have to do our work differently, and we have to be in the world differently. And we have to respond to these things both effectively, use our time wisely, and quickly. We need to find ways in which to harness the power of collaboration and innovation. And I would suggest the two go hand in hand. So we need to increase and deepen our collaboration and innovability and our confidence to be able to collaborate and innovate and have the courage to co-create and park our egos to be able to co-create collective solutions that result in things that are resilient and sustainable. So a tall order for all of us these days. And we need more flexible and comprehensive approaches. It's really, at the end of the day, from our viewpoint, about improving organizational performance. I mean, when I say organizational, I mean really organizations, plural, but we all need to be able to perform at a high level of competency and efficiency and effectiveness. But again, all these things I've got in the middle of the screen here are all intersecting. Leaders feel they lack that ability sometimes to collaborate with their teams, with other organizations, with other partners, through a region or across the country or around the planet. Collaboration is essential for understanding the complexity of these challenges because of that diversity of domains and disciplines and sectors, and for creating those solutions. So no longer can we address health without addressing the environment. We can't talk about environment without talking about energy. We can't talk about the economy without talking about poverty. We can't talk about poverty without talking about affordable housing. Can't talk about affordable housing until we think about homelessness or literacy. Everything, again, is connected. So we need to bring such purposes to all our dialogues, and from there, our intentions, outcomes, and actions. Let's look at a few of the assumptions that underlie taking a dialogue approach, which I feel to be is kind of the window of allowing you to do this kind of work, to address these kind of complex challenges. So we can't tackle these things anymore in silos. So I know I'm talking to those people that right now that just by virtue of industrial ecology are the people that appreciate this more than probably many other disciplines. We need to be able to work across boundaries. We need to understand the connection points between the organizations, across the organizations, disciplines, sectors, domains, and geographic regions. We need to be able to be vulnerable. We need to be able to address what are often very complex concepts that may well sit ambiguous and fuzzy and a bit strange, and be able to sit with that fine, with our emotions, with the way in which we work with one another. Don't fight it, just sit in it. And we need to be able to sit in it for a period of time until we start to understand it, until we start to have these important conversations. We need innovative solutions. So our teams need to engage in that new thinking I was talking about, collaborate in new ways, basically set the scene for much more innovative, be open to development of new skills and competencies for these approaches, and new design structures as well. Our institutions are also, of course, failing us. So the assumption here is that many challenges we face are far more complex than we previously had to face. Secondly, is a dialogue approach addresses complex challenges, in my view, much more effectively. We need to talk, we need to converse about it. So, and it's not just about talk. I know some groups just kind of have interesting dialogues. My view is that the dialogues, if we're going to get into them, need to be highly purposeful. and they need to embrace diversity. The conversations need to be focused. They need to have enough flexibility and provide the safe space where the conversations can be had that'll allow that out of the box type thinking that will help lead to more breakthrough ideas. And that will in turn generate new knowledge and also new insights into the challenge we're dealing with. And we also need some structure to channel your thinking and your energy toward achieving those desired outcomes. Putting the knowledge to work to deliver specific results, which of course takes you back to the purpose. So really dialogue in that sense has to be driven by clear expected outcomes, clarity of the intention, and with the intent to produce results, and often quite quickly. Third assumption, diverse groups need to learn how to co-create. So most diverse groups, and I don't know what your experience has been, but they do not collaborate instinctively. They're not set up sometimes to allow them to do that, and they don't have many, not everyone has the natural instincts to collaborate. So we often have to work hard at learning how to co-create. Again, using various tools and techniques. Overcome our reluctance to put half-formed, ambiguous ideas out to the group. There's nothing wrong with that. Just throw them out there. They don't need to be perfect. We have a saying in the dialogue system that if it's worth doing badly. It may sound absurd, but it's better to get something going, get a conversation started. At noon today, I was talking to a group that were trying to form a food innovation hub in Richmond. And I could see that they're worried about trying to start to put some material to paper. They don't know if they've got all the right people in the room yet. And that's an important consideration, but I said to them, just get started. Just start to write down, what do you think your challenge is? What do you think some of the key assumptions are you want to test? So we need to learn how to collectively build on these ideas and use them as springboards to new thinking and action. So dialogue approaches help diverse groups learn these skills and competencies, I think, fairly quickly. And through that experience, they can then generate the potential solutions. And you can move more quickly with that purpose through that, what we refer to sometimes as the forming, storming, norming section, and ultimately start to be performing back to high performance organizations. We need to be able to tease out the diverse mix of ideas that everyone with that diversity around the room can bring forward and put on the table, and have the confidence and comfort to be able to put it on that table in a safe space. So that's the third assumption. And then lastly is having a little structure is both liberating and efficient. So we don't want to be encumbered by structure or process that's too prescriptive. We need to have some flexibility and adaptability, but that can be helpful. It can help to sort of speed up the process of, and a lot of people like Richmond I just described, where do we begin? We all think we want to create this food innovation hub, but how do you even begin to have that conversation? How do you start? So provide guidance when the conversation also starts to go in circles or sideways. I'm not sure if you've ever experienced that, but often things do. You wonder whether or not you're making any kind of progress. So dialogue approaches tend to provide a sequence where you're starting to allow those things to move forward, where you can check on whether or not people are aligned, ensure that they are, and then move forward, not get stuck on endless circles of self-congratulation. Guiding people, so that some people have a hard time when they get into the swamp to drain it, exactly figuring out where are we in this process. So again, it provides some structure to that process, where you're heading. Are we making progress against our milestones and expected outcomes? And then basic principles, templates, and how-to processes that have been proved to be successful can really help move groups through quickly. And a lot of this is basic bread and butter stuff, but it's important to bring these things onto the table if you want to make progress quickly and efficiently on these things. So I'm just going to take a pause now just to see if there's any questions or things that have come up that I've raised so far. Pierce, so I'll let you facilitate this piece if you like.
Sounds, yeah, beautifully. Thank you for, appreciate the sort of the grounding and experience there. I think it's kind of helpful, and also bringing up that that sort of the interconnectedness of a bunch of the challenges that we're facing and sort of needing to take a multi-pronged approach. I'm curious, if anyone has a question here, feel free to raise your hand here. I guess, at least for me, I definitely find the beautiful. We've got one person. I will just, yeah, feel free to mute yourself. I don't know who this is, but yeah, feel free.
Oh, thanks. This is Christian. Keith, you showed me actually in a meeting this incredible like forest landscape model, which required that dialogue. I'm just curious. I'm thinking at it from kind of an industrial ecology lens of not like metabolism. Like it ended up being that the company was in favor of the less, full extractive forest method. I can't remember what you called it, but you built different scenarios. And yeah. I just think that's so relevant. Like, if industrial ecology is, a lot of it is about, better efficiency in terms of how we use resources, like starting that dialogue. I don't know. Are there dialogues in companies or municipalities that are really about, sustainability in that sort of sense of the word?
Did you say, are there those dialogues?
Well, I guess like that example you showed me in forestry,
yeah.
And that modeling just seems like a real natural like wake up call. And yeah. I just wonder, like, how do you get more of that? I know those sort of dialogues exist, but how does that become more normal? Maybe that's my question.
Yeah, I mean, certainly that methodology that I was showing you that was developed in the mid-90s, which was, spatially explicit forest planning models that go out, more than a century. Those kind of techniques and the associated values that the barometers that move as that forest grows in the computer over time certainly became, I won't say the standard, but close to being the standard across Canada in terms of forest management planning methodologies for bringing into play sustainable forestry that was looking at multiple values concurrently and trade-offs of those. But certainly, I think in other sectors, those kinds of tools, I would say, are starting to become evident. I'm not so sure about in municipal settings whether they are getting as much into what I would call kind of Sim City kind of gaming to help them understand various scenarios and options that way that are spatially explicit and also temporal, to be able to sort of look at a town or a city move in that landscape over time. But I expect that I think there are certainly tools like that. I don't know the extent to which they're being used in those sectors, but I can imagine they probably are.
I have one quick thought here. I'm just looking at our time. I've got 20 minutes left. So I see there's Trist. I see you have a question. Keith, do you, just based off how much time you have left on your presentation, I'm thinking you keep going, and do you think you could like a 10-minute key takeaway close, and then we'll open up for discussion at the end? Does that work for you?
Sure, that's fine.
Okay, and Trist, yeah, I'll remember that you put up your hand, and I'll get back to you during that question period.
Okay. Good. Well, obviously, again, this question here I've got is, just curious about whether or not these kinds of conversations, I can't imagine that they wouldn't be pertinent to industrial ecology. And I may be talking to, you may have obviously existing systems that you're using that are similar to this, or maybe relatively the same. What I'll do is just move on. So I'm going to talk specifically about the challenge dialogue system itself. So this methodology was developed in the early to mid 90s. 1992 was kind of its original development. It was with Don Simpson and a group of leaders, partly across the country, but also that were assembling in Banff School of Management is where it really got birthed. And CDS later, as it was called, is it's a comprehensive, flexible methodology and performance improvement system, which has a powerful capacity to help diverse groups and teams collaborate and innovate to address complex whole system challenges for greater collective impact. That's really what it is in essence. And so it's really a toolkit that has a variety of different ways, both principles, processes, and tools to help groups address these kinds of challenges in group settings, such as I've been describing. The challenge dialogue is one of 4 applications of this, and it's probably the most dominant. The approach it's an 8-step process typically, although there are ways to expedite some of those steps when resources are limited or time is limited. But it helps focus on solving a complex challenge using a structured and disciplined but flexible dialogue process among diverse groups. So it could be anywhere from 10 people in a small team to 250 plus. Some of our largest ones have even gone up to several thousand. And it's typically a dialogue would occur over a 3 to 4 month period. So you use it when you're faced with obviously a significant challenge of strategic importance, and you need people to bring people together that might normally not work together as a team, and you need to get them collaborating quickly and effectively. And the time frame I've already mentioned here. The benefits to the approach, I mean, again, one might say, well, this isn't rocket science, but really about accomplishing a lot more with less real-time meeting required. So a lot of the work is done between the meetings to make sure that you're getting material developed between the meetings so that when people come to the meeting, they are actually using the meetings to help make decisions and also to deal with places where there's misalignment. Misalignment could be due to confusion, a lack of information, or there could be a difference of view clearly. But use those meetings to help resolve those sorts of things. And you also want to document the journey. So that you want to document not so much the minutes, but the progression of documents from the challenge paper to the progress report, to the workshop, the workbook that may support the workshop, to the final dialogue report is all a progression of the thinking as you move from kind of exploring to refining to aligning to optioning and then to action, developing action plans. So it's a natural evolution, but you want, again, in terms of pacing, make sure everyone is being brought along in the process. So it does it through that process. I don't know if you find these timeframes to be relatively short or about average, but most people are quite surprised because they assume these techniques take many months, if not a year or more. So most of ours are much faster than that. But it allows you to move the idea certainly from early idea to action much more quickly. And because you've embraced it within a dialogue setting with multiple stakeholders and interests, there's a much higher chance that there will be buy-in and commitment and support to move forward. In terms of the roles, you see there in the middle column, there are champions for the process, at least one, but usually multiple. If it's a large dialogue involving high-level transformative change, usually across several sectors, then you'll have multiple what we call sector champions that provide specific perspectives on particular discipline-related or domain-related areas. There's a facilitator, clearly, that helps serve as the navigator and the facilitator, a reporter to bring meaning to the information as you're garnering the feedback, a project manager, fairly basic position. Knowledge integrator is looking at the nuggets that come out over the course of the journey to see if they can be put into play and implemented right away. So start to benefit as soon as possible. And mentors of the process. And it seems like, given my age, I'm now seeming to fit the role of the mentor more often these days. The Products, through that step process on the far right, you need a plan for the dialogues, which comes out normally around step 3. A challenge paper is a document designed to engage with prompting and sparking feedback and ideas. It's a very open document. A progress report is feedback on what did we hear from all of the results that we received. Workbook, again, moves and progresses from our thinking in the progress report into a real-time workshop setting. Most of those, of course, are virtual these days, which offers considerable advantages, but also a few disadvantages. But again, it's a progression. We focus the workshop on things, the sticky bits, I call them, the things where there's a little bit more contentious or disagreements. We do spend a little time celebrating the degree of alignment, but we make sure we don't overdo it. We've got lots of work to do, and that's what we focus on in the real-time settings. And then a final dialogue report, which invariably includes next steps and some kind of a quote-unquote 100-day action plan, which occurs in steps 7 and 8.
Just a quick
Some
note
dialogues that are
just a quick note on time, Keith. I'm just thinking we probably have only about like 12 minutes left, so maybe we could leave for like 6 to 7 minutes of questions.
Okay.
So yeah, just a note.
Thanks. Yep. Okay. So this just gives you a picture of the kind of dialogue topics we've been involved in. My public, private, nonprofit sector, academia, a wide range of subject areas, as I mentioned, and a range of scales in terms of regional, national, global, local, etc. The second approach here is the collaborative outcome mapping. This is the one which is much more of a strategic and tactical action framework approach, using the challenge dialogue and theory of change. We work with design teams over 4 workshops, 10 to 14 weeks to develop and map out quite complex maps that delineate the goals and the outcomes and interventions and the like. But it really helps us really understand the level of complexity and actually what it's going to take to achieve a long-term goal. I'll just show you a picture of one of those right here. This is the piece of work that we did for the Sustainable Protein Advantage strategy with the province of Manitoba. It is, this was one of these ones that was developed through 4 workshops. All of the elements in there are benefits and impacts at the upper end of this. And then there is a flow of outcomes going down to interventions. So one long-term goal, 225 outcomes, 117 interventions. Just as a point of interest from an industrial ecology viewpoint, 29 circular economy related elements in this particular one were identified. So things that relate more to industrial ecology. And these maps are developed incrementally. You can see here the various stages going across the top, workshop 1, 2, you can see how the detail starts to come out in these particular maps. And yeah, that's probably about as far as we need to go. This presentation can be made available, obviously, and the PowerPoint. And there are some other supplementary things that I can discuss with Pierce in terms of making them available if they would be deemed to be helpful.
Yeah, thank you very much, Keith. That final slide there showing the evolution of the collaborative outcome map, I think really points to the sort of interconnectivity and growing interconnectivity between the human system. It reflects this ecological way of being. Thank you very much. So if you have a question, Trist, I know you had a question. If you still have a question, feel free to ask it. And then everybody else, if you have a question, just raise our hand here.
Awesome. Thank you. Is my mic working?
Yeah,
it's working well.
Oh, perfect. So I've been sort of following the AI research for a while, and there seem to be some parallels with the sort of global warming where there's at least some subset of AI researchers that are concerned with a lot of things that could go very wrong in the future, and maybe on like a much more rapid timeline than like global warming is seeming to creep up with kind of a boiled frog kind of thing, more slowly. And even so, society seems to have been very slow to sort of come around, get even like first aware of the problem, then arguing about whether the problem is real. And then like now we're seeming to slowly move towards actually doing something about it. So I guess I'm wondering about like timelines on like proving problems, getting like awareness of them. Do you think there's like hope that in the future we can like have a smaller turnaround between researchers discovering a potential catastrophic event and us being able to like popularize it such that it can be made actionable? And I mean, I guess that very relevantly, your sort of challenge dialogue system here, I'm going to have to look more into that, whether you think that applies to this sort of field.
To AI?
Yeah. And in particular, so I'm specifically concerned with the alignment of self-improving, super intelligent AI, which I know sounds ridiculous. It sounds sci-fi movie to most people, but it seems, I don't know, I take it very seriously. I'm concerned that we could potentially get like a Skynet or like some kind of situation with self-improving systems. As we've been slowly creeping towards them, reinforcement learning is getting incredibly powerful, and large language models are starting to have capabilities way outside of what was predicted. Yeah.
Thank you for your question. Yeah, Keith, any brief thoughts
yeah,
on
and thank
that?
you for the talk as well. Sorry.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thanks for coming. The short answer, I think, would be, my thought would be, okay, you're raising what sounds to me like, and my understanding is a very complex challenge involving, multiple stakeholders in multiple domains, concerned with obviously many aspects of both the positive, negative, and the somewhere in between effects of AI on our life on the planet. And I guess from that viewpoint, it would be one way among several ways to open up that conversation to see, what do we feel the challenge is, see if we can articulate the challenge, provide some context for that challenge. I'm thinking about how you would write a challenge paper now, what some of the assumptions we need to test with those that you would want to engage with, what kinds of critical questions you want to ask people, what kind of concepts might you want to plant in people's minds to suggest that they give some consideration and feedback to, and get the conversation started. And my guess is that it will be a substantial conversation, and it will probably involve several cycles. Whether or not it might involve the kind of mapping work that I was just showing for Manitoba, there's no reason it couldn't. But really, you are just addressing, and I don't mean to diminish the challenge because I know it's huge and it's very essential that we have that conversation. But I think it certainly qualifies for something that you might consider to be using a challenge dialogue approach for.
Thanks, Keith. Bob, I think you'll be our last question here.
Yeah, thanks, Pierce. Thanks, Keith, for a great presentation. I'm also a former graduate of UVic, 30 years in the provincial government on the environmental file, circular economy, worked in energy, agriculture, environment, right? So I think in systems all the time. And, but I want to, on the challenge dialogue, I just want to find, do you think this is something that, this is really for decision makers like deputy minister council folks to be sitting around the table to deal with our complex problems? Or do you think there should be a broader audience within the government systems sitting around the table? Because I find things aren't happening at the pace that they should be happening. And having decision makers go through, these kind of processes to make informed decisions is what is really needed. And I think earlier it was asked about like, how normal is this out there? Like, who's familiar with this? So if it's just this new approach for some people, we got a lot of work to do. But also wanted to point out, we've seen a major change in demographics everywhere. There's a lot of labor gaps we filled, and in the government system, we have essentially a new entry of younger people coming in, not knowledgeable, but they're educated. And I know they probably want to work to try to push for change. Even new graduates coming out want to push for change. But when you get in the government system, you get silenced. I've tried to heavy lift a lot of things out of government as an analyst up to senior level people, and you just say, listen to you, and then they brush you off to the side. So I just want to hear your perspective on that, because you worked in government, the forest policy has changed. There's a lot we can do with our biomass in the forest, but things aren't happening. So I just want to, I know I threw a lot of things at you there, but I'm the last one, so I'm taking my time. So
thanks for loading me up, Bob. So the short answer to your question, can it be used at the executive team level? The answer is yes. Has it been used at the executive team level? The answer is yes. Can it be used to have a broader set of stakeholders at the ground level right up to the executive team, which one would hope the executive team, in fact, would play some of those champion roles? Yes. Can it be used to transform a sector? I would say it can make a very strong start on it, which we've done in many cases. Manitoba Sustainable Protein Strategy is a good example, which was a intent to really try and champion a significant shift in thinking. We've used it, I would think, on many transformative initiatives of that kind. Dawn has used it extensively in earlier days in the Northwest Territories and with Indigenous populations. The dialogue approach, I think, works well with some of their ways of doing and thinking. I think our biggest challenge these days, Bob, you mentioned the younger people coming up who are well educated but haven't necessarily got the experience. I think it's a very gentle way to get them up to speed quickly. And I think it can be inspiring. It's about developing some competencies and muscles in their brain and ways of thinking that are not things you can normally learn at school. But I would say they're extremely learnable. We have done many dialogues with provincial governments, Ontario, British Columbia. I've done probably a half dozen or more than probably 10 with the provincial government in BC. Half dozen at least, well, probably 10 with Ontario, Alberta, a gazillion. Saskatchewan, mining sector. We've done tens of projects of this type. They lend themselves well, I think, to both explorative level things, but I would also say with intentions to really not just explore, but do. Natural resources sector information council. I did some work with them where were all the ministries, the dirt ministries that produced resource information, forestry lots, environment lots on climate change in the last couple of years. So I think it's quite possible. I would love to talk to you about some of that. I think that I'm glad you're working hard at it. We need it.
Yeah, no, thanks. And I don't know how to connect with you. I guess I can put my email in there. We can have a chat about.
I can also connect you to as well.
Thanks, Ann. Yeah, it'd be good to chat with you further because I feel I come up with conceptual ideas that I want to take to government. But you seem to have, through your framework, the attention, whereas I'm looking at, okay, let's start implementing the climate action plan. I can tell you lots of stories around that, everyone's got plans, but things aren't moving at the pace they should be. So
Exactly.
Thank you. Thank you, Bob. And
Yeah.
yeah, so that comes to the end of this hour together. I really appreciate you all being present and being in space together. This will be recorded, and we'll also make sure contact details can be shared. So I thank everybody, and I wish you a wonderful spring and summer as it comes.
Thanks for the opportunity, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.